The next speaker is actually my colleague, Jack Turner. Jack and I work together at G&E Advisory, and we advise countries that are moving towards nuclear energy, as well as advising on the procurement and construction of new nuclear power plants. Now, I was recently in Vienna at the International Atomic Energy Agency's annual general conference, and in that conference, as part of it, countries make national statements. And I sat in and listened to some of those statements, and country after country after country got up and made it very clear that nuclear energy was going to be key to their decarbonised, secure energy futures. And so I think it's a nice opportunity for us to round out this session to hear a little bit about what those countries are doing, what their ambitions are, and to just get a bit of a picture of what the world outside of Australia looks like when it comes to nuclear energy. Jack.
Good morning, everybody. So today, I'll be giving you an update on some of the developments that we're seeing globally in the nuclear energy sector. And what it is I hope to achieve is that by painting a picture of what's happening in Australia, I'm going to be able to demonstrate to you all that the world is very much going nuclear. As Helen mentioned, I'm in somewhat of a unique position in that these developments are part of what my day job entails, and hopefully in some cases even facilitating some of these developments that we're seeing globally. So I think the best place to start is with a big picture view of what is happening throughout the world in terms of nuclear energy. So the green dots on this first slide show the 32 countries that are currently operating the more than 400 nuclear reactors around the world. There are also 62 reactors currently under construction, and that construction activity is taking place in 15 different countries. The majority of these new reactors are being built in existing nuclear countries, and a high number of which are in China. I also want to, though, call out the 3 newcomer nuclear countries that are indicated by the orange dots on the screen. These are Egypt, Turkey, and Bangladesh. These 3 countries are all currently in the process of constructing their first civil nuclear power plants. I'll be talking about all of them a little bit later. However, I think to give you a better picture of what I mean when I say the world is going nuclear, I want to direct your attention to the orange dots on this slide. These dots indicate the countries that have been identified by the IAEA in its annual technology review as actively considering nuclear energy, or moving ahead with new nuclear energy programs. In fact, the IAEA identifies 50 such countries. However, you'll see that only 27 are actually indicated on the slide. That's because the other 24 plus countries are not explicitly disclosed by the IAEA, because they are what they describe as being in a pre-decision making phase. I think this slide, though, really puts into perspective the potential growth in global disbursement of nuclear energy that we are very likely to see in the coming years. And I'm very confident that we'll see this list of 50 newcomer countries continue to expand as more countries recognise the need for nuclear to be part as a key element of their decarbonised energy systems. Now, before I move on to discussing some of the more major global developments at a more micro level, I just want to quickly acknowledge the declaration to triple nuclear energy, which was announced at the COP28 conference in December last year. And I'm sure many of you also saw just a couple of weeks ago that 14 global financial institutions, including the Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs, have now endorsed the pledge. I think these declarations provide some important context in terms of the growing interest in nuclear energy that we're seeing globally. Now, today I'll be focusing a lot of my time on new build. However, it's very important that I stress that the global trend also encompasses life extension programs, restart and refurbishment initiatives, and even the championing of advanced nuclear technologies through pilot and demonstration programs. So firstly, I want to take a look at North America, and we'll start with the United States. In addition to the 4th and final unit of the Vogtle nuclear power plant commencing operation in May of this year, we've seen some unprecedented bipartisan support for both existing and new plants through initiatives such as the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, which provides significant investment and tax incentives, and also funding for innovation, research, development, commercialisation of advanced reactor technologies. And I'm talking about initiatives such as the Department of Energy's Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. As I just mentioned, there's been strong bipartisan support in the United States for existing plants. We have Diablo Canyon in California being extended. We have Palisades in Michigan coming back to life. And also now 3 Mile Island, thanks to Microsoft's insatiable need for clean and reliable power to support its artificial intelligence operations. I think a great way, though, to gauge the temperature in the country in terms of future nuclear energy is to refer to the September 2024 update of the US Department of Energy's report entitled Pathways to Commercial Liftoff Advanced Nuclear. This update, in addition to noting that the US capacity has the potential to triple from 100 gigawatts in 2024 to 300 gigawatts in 2035, states that nuclear has an essential role in the energy transition as a clean, firm complement to renewables. And that regardless of a level of renewable deployment, the DOE's decarbonisation modelling shows that the US will need at least 700 to 900 gigawatts of additional firm capacity to reach net zero. Moving quickly to Canada, and like the United States, we're seeing significant government support for nuclear through initiatives such as the Canadian Investment Tax Credit Scheme and also the Green Bond Framework, which recognises nuclear as a green energy source and opens up historically limited financing for the construction of new reactors and also the refurbishment of existing reactors. There are also SMR and MMR demonstration projects that were mentioned earlier taking place in Canada. And I point in particular to the Darlington New Nuclear Project, which is being developed by Ontario Power Generation and will see the demonstration of GE Hitashi's BWX300 SMR technology. Now, moving to Europe, this is obviously an extremely interesting region and we're seeing significant activity. You'll see the boxes on the screen show what some of the established nuclear countries are looking to do in terms of new build and existing plants. You'll note in particular President Macron's pledge in 2022 to construct up to 14 new reactors in France. There's also the United Kingdom, which in addition to having made the decision to proceed with the construction of its next large-scale nuclear power plant, Sizewell C, has released the British Energy Security Strategy at the beginning of this year, which establishes a goal of deploying up to 24 gigawatts of nuclear energy in the UK by 2050, which triples current capacity. And you might be noticing a theme there. Sorry. There's also some major developments taking place in Poland. Probably the most notable of this is the government granting a decision in principle for the construction of Poland's first nuclear power plant, which will consist of 3 Westinghouse AP1000 units in Pomerania. Construction is due to begin in 2026 and commissioning of the first unit in 2033. According to the government's energy policy, the commissioning of this first unit will be followed by the commissioning of subsequent units every 2 to 3 years, up to a total of 6 units. There's also significant interest coming from industry in Poland, particularly the chemical sector, which is seeking to decarbonise activities for the use of SMRs and also MMRs. Another country that I think we should be focusing on very closely is Estonia, and I was actually fortunate enough to visit Tallinn last year as part of some work supporting a group formed by the Estonian government to assess and provide recommendations as to the country's need for nuclear energy. The report and recommendations that were produced by this group were the impetus for the Estonian Parliament this year voting in favour of a declaration to implement a civil nuclear energy program. I think I should also very quickly mention the Netherlands and Sweden, as there's been some interesting developments in both of these countries. The Swedish government has replaced its 100% renewable electricity target with a 100% fossil-free electricity target. This was very quickly followed by the government unveiling a roadmap at the end of last year, which envisages the construction of new nuclear reactors equivalent to at least 2 large-scale reactors by 2035, with up to 10 new large-scale reactors online by 2045. The Netherlands also has ambitious plans to build 2 new reactors by 2035. And finally, I'll just quickly touch on Italy, where we're seeing the possibility of a significant policy shift, with the country's energy minister just last month confirming that the government would look to introduce laws to allow nuclear technologies to be reintroduced into the country following a post-Fukushima moratorium. Now, moving quickly to Africa, and you would have seen on my earlier slides that South Africa is currently the only country on the continent with nuclear power. However, there are also a number of other countries. Sorry, just make sure my slides bringing these up. There are also a number of other countries that have very tangible and active programs, and I have these on screen as indicated by the orange dots. And these aren't just countries that have flirted with the idea of nuclear energy, but they're actually doing the work needed together with the IAEA and other partner countries to actually introduce it into their respective countries. Now, I've already mentioned Egypt, which is presently in the process of constructing its first nuclear power plant. I've actually visited the El Dabar site on a number of occasions over the past 2 years, and the project is moving at a very impressive pace, and once complete is going to impact the lives of all Egyptians immensely. There are two countries, though, that I'd like to note in particular on this slide, and that is Ghana and Kenya. Ghana, which has an established target to see a reactor in its electricity mix by 2034, saw the signing of an agreement in August this year between Nuclear Power Ghana, which is a Ghanaian government entity, and NuScale to deploy a Voyager 12 small modular reactor plant. And these developments come off the back of an agreement signed with the United States in June this year to establish establish Ghana as a regional SMR hub. Ghana also has ambitious plans for large reactors, and I think everyone should be monitoring this quite closely over the next 12 to 18 months. In Kenya, the Kenya Nuclear Power and Energy Agency released its 2023 to 2027 strategic plan in March of this year, which targets the commissioning of the country's first nuclear power plant by 2034. A roadmap contained in that strategic plan suggests site preparations for the plant beginning in 2029, with construction starting in 2030 or 2031. Now I'll move very briefly to the Middle East. Of course, the big name of the region is the UAE, but in light of present company, I don't think I need to provide any updates on this particular country. However, I will say that Saudi Arabia has quite an advanced procurement process underway for large reactors, and they're also very interested in small reactors as well. However, recent geopolitical factors may have slowed progress somewhat. Turkey will be bringing online the first of 4 units of its inaugural Akuyu nuclear power plant next year, and there is currently much talk in that country about taking steps to embark on the construction of a second nuclear power plant in the near future. I also just want to mention one particularly interesting update that only happened literally a matter of days ago, and that is Kazakhstan has voted in a referendum in support of the construction of a nuclear power plant. And I think the preliminary results showed that there was a 63% voter turnout for that referendum, and 70% of the voters supported the plant. Now, finally, I'd like to focus the remainder of my time discussing some updates a little bit closer to home in Asia and Southeast Asia. So I think this will help give everyone a bit of an idea about what's happening in our region and where Australia is placed in it. As previously mentioned, we're seeing significant new build occurring in both India and China. In fact, if China proceeds with its current ambitions, it will soon overtake the US as having the largest nuclear fleet in the world. In both South Korea and Japan, we've recently seen some very telling policy shifts. South Korea has scrapped its nuclear phase-out plans and replaced them with a target to provide at least 30% of the country's electricity by 2030, and Japan has recommitted to nuclear energy with a plan for 20 to 22% of its electricity generation to come from nuclear by 2030, and that's up from 5% as of 2022. However, what's most interesting are those countries that I've indicated here on the orange dots on the screen. These are all actively introducing or actively considering nuclear energy. And I think this paints, like I said, it paints a very important picture as to Australia's potential future position in our region. Now, there's a couple I should probably call out immediately, like Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia, which have done no more than have discussions with Russia and China and formalise those discussions in an MOU. But every other country indicated by an orange dot has at some stage actually proceeded through the first phase of the IAEA's milestones approach. In terms of recent developments, I'll firstly point to the Philippines, where there's been traction following an executive order in 2022 relaunching the country's civil nuclear energy program. Since then, two important bills have been drafted and are currently making their way through the necessary Senate and congressional approval processes. One which revamps the country's national nuclear law and establishes an independent civil nuclear regulatory body known as Philatom, and another which establishes a comprehensive national nuclear liability regime. And without wanting to embarrass Helen too much, she's been instrumental in advising the Philippine government on both these critical pieces of legislation. But what makes the Philippines particularly interesting is the fact that there's already a fully constructed nuclear power plant in the country, the Bataan nuclear power plant. This was constructed in the 1980s, but never commissioned due to a change in political leadership. The Bataan plant has been kept in an excellent state of maintenance, and there are certainly factions within the current Philippines Congress that would like to see Bataan commissioned as soon as possible. In fact, as early as Monday, an agreement was concluded with Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power to conduct a feasibility study on behalf of the Philippines Department of Energy to evaluate the startup of the Bataan plant. You may have seen in the earlier slides that Indonesia is one of the 17 countries that have been identified by the IAEA as being in the decision-making phase with respect to the introduction of nuclear energy. And in fact, there's been a very recent update with President Widodo just a couple of weeks ago, signing into law the country's long-term development plan, which includes nuclear energy as a key pillar. The plan includes a 2030 to 2034 timeline for commissioning and operation of a nuclear power plant in the country. There's also been talk of nuclear energy in Singapore, particularly off the back of a report produced by the country's 2050 committee in 2022, which advises in one scenario that Singapore may need nuclear energy in the future. Now, whilst there's been no firm decision made in Singapore, the country's nevertheless prudently commenced working towards readying itself for the possibility of the introduction of civil nuclear energy in the future. We, of course, have Bangladesh, which is close to completion of its first nuclear power plant, with commercial operations expected to commence in 2025. And finally, I'll mention both Vietnam and Malaysia, as both countries have had quite active and advanced programs before decisions were made to put these on hold. Both countries would be well placed to move quickly, however, if a decision was made to revisit nuclear energy, which I think would be entirely feasible considering the interests in the wider region. So finally, I'd like to leave you with a few key takeaways. What I hope I've been able to clearly demonstrate here is that there's unprecedented global support for nuclear energy. And the main drivers are growing recognition that nuclear energy is a necessary component of a decarbonised energy system that can meet climate objectives, and also a desire to ensure energy security. A theme across all of these countries is the central role of government in leading and driving these developments forward. And finally, Australia is in a region that is clearly moving ahead with nuclear energy. And I think it's important that when we are thinking about what this means for us, we need to be mindful that nuclear energy is not an overnight proposition. I think Australia is very well positioned to move forward expeditiously, but we should not be waiting to see what happens. Rather, we should be taking note of what all these other countries are strategically doing right now, which is taking action to ensure that they'll be ready later this decade or into the 2030s. Thank you very much.